Greetings everyone and welcome to Brickcats. Today I'm reviewing Inthert's, I guess this is a minifigure scale X-Wing Starfighter. As always, please consider leaving a like, subscribing to the channel, leaving a comment, participating in a community discussion where I'll be posting more work-in-progress pictures in the future here, or supporting what I do in any other way you see fit. I greatly appreciate it. The X-Wing needs no introduction, so I'm going to get right into it. Without any substitutions, Bricklink was giving me 4 stores and $105 without shipping and tax, or about $137 with shipping and tax. I was able to get this down significantly. In my reviews, I offer my opinions on aesthetics and model features, parts issues you might want to look out for, the build experience, the model's integrity, and I close out with my overall impression and pricing information in the conclusion. If you're watching this review, I assume you bought the instructions or are interested in buying them. I also assume a basic level of familiarity with Bricklink's ordering system and LEGO nomenclature. I only use genuine LEGO bricks, and I always purchase the instructions. I create these reviews for my own personal enjoyment, and in the hopes that my advice will make your experience more enjoyable and or less expensive. Inthert's X-Wing measures 11.75 inches long, 10.25 inches wide, and tops out about 7 inches high on the stand and about 2.5 inches on its landing gear. Starting at the nose, the shape is pretty good, and this is a great use of the minifigure shield piece on the side here. The nose cone should extend slightly wider than the fuselage, but given the way this is constructed, this would be quite difficult. It does pop up above the front fuselage just a little bit right here. There are a few gaps in the nose cone, but nothing too serious, and really nothing that can be reasonably covered up either. The front fuselage is very nicely done in my opinion, with these angled panel side constructions and some side building on the top here. The stripe is interrupted on several X-Wings in canon, and that actually plays to the advantage of this model, as you wouldn't be able to have a uniform red stripe running all the way down here the way this is constructed. I would have liked to have seen some representation of the proton torpedo tube somehow, perhaps with one of those brackets holding the cheese slopes specified in black, but it's an understandable omission at this scale, and I guess you could do a lot worse by just substituting out one of these 1x2 cheese slopes for a black one. There's also a small discontinuity with these slopes here at the very front of the fuselage, just due to the way this is angled in. However, from the top view that I'll show you, this way. I mean, the shape of this fighter just really doesn't get any better than that. The cockpit uses bars to outline the shape of the canopy, and proportionally, this is actually very accurate to how large the cockpit is in canon. As you can see, I've got Wedge in there. He sits just fine, and the pilot does have a control stick and the printed tile representing the X-Wing's instrument panel. The rear of the cockpit is actually my least favorite part of the ship, and that's this 2x3 tile. This is actually the connection point for the entire canopy, so you can't really replace this with something that looks a little better. Inthert has modified the standard 2x2 astromech to fit, and while this is clearly out of scale, the astromech figures are too large to scale nicely with a minifigure anyway. The droid isn't meant to be removable, but it's simple enough to pop them out and see how Inthert has done that. So very clever there. The greebling on the back of the main part of the fuselage looks really good, but I do wish this was in dark bluish gray to differentiate it a little bit from the body. Most X-Wings we see in canon, maybe all of them actually, typically have this stripe as a bit darker than the surrounding hull. And while we're here, I do want to highlight this extremely subtle transition from this back section of the hull to the front, and that's achieved using the old style hinges, and they're right about here, and you can barely see the slightest of gaps where that hinge piece is and where the angle starts. That's really cool. The newer 3x3 round bricks Inthert uses for the engines, these were the elements that Inthert scaled the rest of the ship to, and these are just great pieces in general. The T shape on the intakes is formed with a pneumatic T, and then two 1x1 tiles wedged in between the studs of the 2x2 round plates that you can probably not see very well inside there. But not only does this look really good, the T doesn't flop around like it does on some larger models. The exhaust vents, as you can see from the front-on view, they are offset slightly from the main axis of the engine. And use of a Technic gear inside the exhaust vent there is an interesting choice. I personally would have preferred a trans dark pink tile or something to represent some engine glow, but this is fairly easy to modify if you'd like to. And while we're at the back of the fighter again, we see this really great shaping for the rear hull. And again, some nice greeveling. Again, I would have liked to see these in dark bluish gray just because this section is typically a different color than the hull, but it certainly doesn't look bad. The S-foils do open and close just fine. There's no mechanism to do it, so you just open and close them manually. The S-foils are generally 2 plates thick, and there is a good amount of detail on them. I do wish there was a better way to get the red stripes or a red stripe on the trailing edge here without a specialized tile or a sticker. But unfortunately, adding a 1x1 tile, for example, if you want this to be red leader, this is right at the gap between 2 wedges underneath right there, so I don't think that will work out very well. The S-foils have, you can see on the bottom here, some reversed wedges to make the trailing edge, and these slope sections on the other side of the engines here are very well done. And another thing that I really love, this really kind of unnecessary but still included detail, which I really appreciate. Inthert has included some detailing on the inside of the wings as well. Finally, the cannons have the blue striping pattern represented with sand blue 1x1 round plates, while the other 2 are just plain gray. The cannons extend way past the cockpit, and this is also very cannon accurate, and I was happy to see that the common 6L bar was sufficient to get the right length here without resorting to more expensive elements like hoses. Inthert notes in the README file that you can add or remove colors as you see fit to give the fighter a more or less weathered look. Aside from the areas I think should be a slightly darker shade than the hull, my only other comment on the choice of light bluish gray is that at smaller scales, I think this model can seem really dark. So as a side project, I think I'm going to try and build a white version just to see how it compares. And then this is totally not to say that this looks bad in light bluish gray. This clearly looks amazing. And also to kind of augment the weathering effect, I actually did kind of made an effort to find my old light gray or sun-damaged light bluish gray pieces to use on this model, and I think it turned out pretty well. The stand by which I've been holding this model the entire time, I don't really want to take this off the stand, I will explain that later, but it's all black, it's very simple and effective, and it looks great. I think everyone can agree that this X-Wing looks absolutely phenomenal. The designer has successfully included details that most larger models omit or don't do nearly as well, and this is even more impressive given the small physical size of the model. Inthert's X-Wing and the stand require 194 elements and 925 pieces. The stand is a separate parts list, but there's no common pieces, so it's fairly easy to combine them into one wanted list if you prefer. The hinge plate 1x2 with 2 fingers, hollow studs, part 4276B, and the hinge plate 1x2 with 3 fingers, hollow studs, part 4275B, both specified in black, can be any neutral color. Light gray is a good choice, but these are basically completely hidden, and those are located right about here, and again they form that subtle angle that transitions from the rear hull to the front hull. And personally, I think you'd be fine with any color. You can't really see these. Maybe if you peeked underneath, you can see this little gap here, you can see it, but I don't think it's going to be a big deal. But you're definitely safe with a neutral color. And note that you might also have some luck finding inexpensive versions of the hollow stud mold for this piece, part 4276A and 4275A. The minifigure utensil toolbox wrench, 3-rib handle in flat silver, part 11402I, is completely hidden in the rear fuselage and can be any color. Flat silver is the most common, but black is also reasonably common. The Technic pin 1/2 with friction ridges, part 89768, specified in red, is very similar to the standard Technic pin 1/2 without friction ridges, part 4274. Of course, the difference is that the one has friction ridges and the other doesn't. In this case, I think it's actually important that you get the piece with the friction ridges, as the places you're using these pins, you need all the friction you can get. These are newer elements, but not particularly expensive, and they are also quite common in dark bluish gray. They're completely hidden inside the interior, and you can get any color. The tile 1x2 with groove with avionics Star Wars copper red and silver pattern is quite expensive these days, and that's of course the instrument panel. I do think it looks best in terms of what an X-Wing instrument panel actually looks like, but prices range from $1 all the way up to $4 for this tile. So you could do a lot worse than just a simple 1x2 black jumper plate and a trans yellow 1x1 tile, or just leave it out. The minifigure binoculars, part 30162, specified in dark bluish gray. This is used to hold the two sides of the front fuselage together, and it's located right about here. This is hidden and can be any color. The piece likely to be most uncommon and therefore the most expensive is the bracket 2x2 1x4 in black, part 2422. This was last produced in 1999. This element forms the seats for the cockpit, and is mostly covered by a tile on the other side of the fighter, but it is somewhat visible inside the cockpit. If you can find a neutral color like dark gray or light gray, that would work great. Inthert noted in his Instagram that you can also substitute the bracket for a slightly less stable subassembly, for which you'll need the hinge plate 1x2 locking with 2 fingers on side and 9 teeth, part 60471, the hinge plate 1x2 locking with 1 finger on end without bottom groove, part 44301B, 2 extra 1x2 plates, part 3023, and an extra 2x2 plate, part 3022, presumably all in black. The hinges form the right angle, while the extra 1x2 plates extend each side of the replica bracket to the proper length. Finally, some of the newer elements are quite expensive on Bricklink as usual. You might consider buying the following elements directly from LEGO through the Pick-a-Brick service. Remember that in order to eliminate the handling fees, you need to spend at least $14 for bestseller or standard elements, and each threshold is calculated independently of each other, and you need to spend $35 total to get free shipping. Inthert's builds are typically like no other, and this one is no exception, and this is part of the draw from the model in my opinion. There are numerous clever connections, lots of weird angles and techniques, and overall it's just a lot of fun to see how this model comes together. The X-Wing requires 305 steps for the fighter and an additional 11 for the stand. Each part of a subassembly you add in a given step is outlined in red against a grayish background, which works just fine for visibility. On a very small number of steps, I thought the sequencing could be a little better just for ease of construction. For example, these cheese slopes are rather difficult to get on in step 101 because the headlight bricks aren't secured by anything but their top stud. However, these are more personal preference than anything, and in the end it doesn't make a huge difference. That said, the novelty of how this model comes together means that occasionally I felt like some of the connections weren't as obvious, and it took me a little longer than normal just to figure out how a subassembly was going to connect to the rest of the model. I suppose this is part of the fun, but it would be nice to have a little more guidance in certain places, such as when these long front-to-back assemblies connect to the train pantograph shoe pieces. Due to the novelty of this model's construction, it took me a little longer than a 900-piece model typically would, about 4 hours start to finish without any pre-sorting of pieces beforehand. I think more experienced builders will get the most out of this model, and those newer to mock building can probably complete it just fine given enough time and patience. In my opinion, this model is best on display and should not be used for significant play. That said, it is surprisingly sturdy everywhere it needs to be, including in the back here where you're most likely to grab this if you're looking to swish it. Uniquely among X-Wing models I've built, I think the wings are actually the weakest part of this model. They're 2 studs thick, but there's a lot of connections along their length, and I have noticed them sagging a bit, especially the bottom wings. So I would avoid, and you can kind of see like a little gap here. So it's just slightly off true. And that's pretty common. So I would probably avoid swishing this really hard, but this should stand up to reasonable play. I did not find the landing gear to be very stable at all. I'm not even going to show you, particularly the two back skids. Well, I'll show you the skids. They do fold down outside of the underside engine, and I guess I probably forgot to show the underside of the model, but it's very clean as you would expect. So these two back skids are not very stable at all, but they are included if you want to try and pose this, and the front skid folds down like that. Since the S-foils don't really have a mechanism, they are a little wobbly, and you can do kind of weird things like having that be off-center. So it rotates about the center axis even when they're in the the flight position. And but spreading them apart, there is a good amount of resistance there, so it's not just going to collapse on you if you jiggle it up and down. Aside from the wings, I think the biggest issue in terms of model integrity or stability is the stand, and that's mostly because while this holds the fighter at a really nice angle when it's on, it does have the unfortunate ability to rotate forward like this. So if the stand does tip forward and there's nothing stopping the X-Wing from nosediving right into whatever's in front of the model, which could be a significant drop, if this is on a shelf or something, you might have a very damaged X-Wing indeed. Luckily, it's not the easiest thing to get the fighter on and off the stand. I mean, with these hinges, you to take it off, you kind of angle it in the opposite way that the hinges would move, like front or back. And getting it on, this goes on pretty easily with a nice click. And so it's not the worst thing in the world that this is slightly maybe more difficult than normal to get off a stand. I'm perfectly fine with that because I think this model looks best on display. But if you try taking it off, keep in mind you're going to want to watch where you're applying pressure. Some of these internals are not too bad, but I wouldn't, press real hard on anything right here. Inthert's X-Wing is easily the most unique model available, and I'm very glad he made instructions for it, as I've been drilling over this one since he posted the initial pictures of it back in July 2021. It's very interesting to see how the design evolved between the initial version and the one we have instructions for. If you decide to build this model, you will certainly not be disappointed. It is highly accurate, a radically different scale from what we typically see in X-Wing models, and the build experience is likely going to be different than pretty much any model you've built before. Pricing on this model wasn't too bad either. Without any substitutions, like I said in the introduction, I got 4 stores and $105 without shipping and tax, or about $137 with shipping and tax. With hinge plate substitutions, without the printed tile, if you substitute the wrench for any color, and you do the rare bracket substitution, I got 3 stores and $102 without shipping and tax, or $120 with shipping and tax. And if you get the majority of your items from Pick-a-Brick, in April 2023, I got all but 6 elements from Pick-a-Brick, and the Pick-a-Brick total was $90, including tax, and that qualified for free shipping and handling. The remaining 6 elements I was able to get from one Bricklink store, totaling $4 without shipping and tax, or about $10 with shipping and tax. The grand total was therefore $100. Inthert's X-Wing instructions and the parts list are available for free and are posted on his Google Drive. There will be a link to the instructions and the parts list in the description. Thanks as always for watching my review of Inthert's X-Wing. If you built the model, you have something to share that I left out, or have a question about something I didn't cover, please leave them below in the comments or post in the community section. Remember to leave the video a like, subscribe to the channel, or follow me on Instagram if you haven't already, and I hope to see you back next time.